Deb Harlan is an artist and researcher based in New York, working in sculpture, installation, and digital media with a multidisciplinary practice across art and science. His work explores landscape, anthropogenic change, and technological consumption. And today, Deb is going to be talking to us about thin nature's speculative cause and rumors of the regenerative term. So I really look forward to this. So over to you, Deb.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks for the quick introduction. So I'm just going to be talking, a little bit about my background and artistic practice, and then some specific recent artworks that are relevant to this conference. So just a little bit about myself. I work in sculpture, installation, and digital media. I was, born in Phoenix, Arizona, but grew up in the California Bay Area. So I was surrounded by a lot of technology. So not surprisingly, my work features a lot of technology, but also working with materials like plaster and stone and metal in an assemblage sort of fashion. But I don't have formal training. I dropped out of school actually in the late 90s to go work in San Francisco during the dot-com boom. I was really excited by, new media at that time, experimental video. And for a long time, I worked with video projection mapping and generative coding and these sort of new media practices. And later with sculpture, doing stone carving and casting and whatnot. So I think I'm a fairly hybrid person these days. And to keep things even more interesting, I recently decided to go back to school and do a degree in earth science. So I'm now at Columbia, kind of finishing up my final requirements for an undergraduate degree there. And so I moved through a lot of different disciplines, and so my work is also very multidisciplinary. I think my interest in geology began a few years ago during some art residencies that I had done in the Southwest. And, I was fascinated by the landscape and did a lot of kind of observational photography of different sites that I'd visit, from the macro to the micro, looking at, both the natural landscape and also anthropogenic change in the landscape, which is not hard to find once you start sort of roaming around Southwest. And that over time led to an interest in geosciences. Really quickly, I'll talk about this last year I've been doing research for my senior thesis, which I'm happy to say is finally finished, where I've been looking at ice mass loss on the Greenland ice sheet, which of course is due to anthropogenic warming. I won't go into much to the results of this study, but just to say that it relied heavily on remote sensing. This is Landsat imagery of the Zachary Istrom Glacier in the northeast. And so, again, using kind of photographic lens to consider the landscape. And I'm fascinated by the remote sensing imagery because of its sort of dual nature as having a quantitative dimension in terms of telling us what's going on with the glacier over time, for instance, but also an aesthetic quality in the way it represents landscape. And I think that the formal language of landscape and geology in a cultural context is a useful way to talk about the longer, larger timescales and more than human processes that impact humans and vice versa. And also an entry point talking about human reliance on natural mineral materials. So these images are photogrammetry, they are digital renders from photogrammetry models. If you're not familiar with photogrammetry, it basically means taking a lot of pictures of something and you stitch them together with 3D software to create a mesh or a model. I produced a lot of these while I was in the desert, and wherever I go, wherever I travel, rather, I take photographs of rocks and boulders. I've produced a lot of these sort of digital renderings of disembodied floating boulders as a way to investigate geological form. I've also tried looking at the landscape through aerial photography in sort of a DIY fashion, where I was kind of attempting high altitude aerial balloon photography with a weather balloon, helium weather balloons, partly because it's cost effective, but also because it's less annoying than a drone. This is some imagery over Amboy crater in the Mojave Desert. And from the aerial images, I was also able to reconstruct using 3D photogrammetry like a mesh terrain of the site. And so this is kind of an open-ended experimentation where I'm moving between different disciplines to look at landscape in different ways. In this case, it's perhaps looking at it through sort of a technological lens. I've also been investigating the landscape through directly casting surfaces like rocks and boulders and reproducing them in plaster or other materials, sort of, replicating features in the landscape that are interesting. And then to bring that full circle into my digital practice, I ended up doing video projection onto the geological surfaces using video projection mapping and generative software. The image on the left is actually a surface from a road cut at a mining site in the near Joshua Tree. So these are some process images of kind of what that looks like. This is a abandoned iron quarry out a little east of Joshua Tree, and went out there for a few days, kind of documenting the landscape, documenting the mine, and then also taking a casting of the road cut leading up to the mine, and then produced a sculpture based on the 3D, or sorry, on the physical casting of the surface. And so in a way, I'm thinking about land use and anthropogenic change by directly referencing the site that's been disrupted or displaced by these extractive industries. This image is from a projection sculpture that was done at while doing a residency at SVA in New York, and the projection is from photographic material of the site as well. So images of the site documented through photography, as well as the physical surface of the site are coming together into the sculpture. And in recent work, I've also been trying to bring the technology from the exterior, as it were, into the actual sculpture itself. So instead of the projectors and the computers being kind of disembodied or off in the periphery, I'm actually incorporating them directly into the sculpture. So there's a casting of the stone and then the video projection on the stone, and the projector and the computer are all kind of integrated into the sculpture in a unified way to, I don't know, really make more of a commentary on what the technology is that's happening here rather than it being in the background. And thinking also about, what the materials are and the technology as a material and its material sort of contingencies. For instance, the metals and minerals that must be mined again through extractive processes to, produce the technology. So at some point, I also thought about reversing that process, how to recover those materials. This was sort of a experiment where I tried to recover gold from electronic e-waste, which is actually being done at an industrial scale at this point. But again, in a DIY fashion, kind of an experimental fashion, collecting e-waste and through some noxious chemicals, extracting gold. And the image on the right is a little glob. This is macro photography. It's very tiny. What is tests as gold, at least, embedded in a piece of melted borax. And so again, I'm thinking about how technology is inextricably linked to the mineral world and how reliant it is on the extractive processes required to obtain those minerals and metals. I've always sort of collected e-waste. That's kind of a side story, and I have a lot of this material laying around, and also photograph things when I see them in the wild, like a cell phone embedded in the sand on the beach. And that gets me thinking about the way electronics and plastics become part of the sedimentary record. And I also collect lots of sand, rocks, sand, and shells and stuff naturally. And so I began a series of work where I'm essentially creating like a sort of a core sample reference by combining these e-waste materials with the sand and the rocks into an acrylic tube, creating a 3D scan of that through 3D photogrammetry, And then the disembodied 3D model without the cylinder ends up uh, referencing the geological core. And I've done this with a lot of different materials, with sand and plastics and leftover 3D printing waste and Ethernet cables and bubble mailers and all the sort of things that end up in the waste bin, as it were. And creating these cylinders of conglomerate, I think the language of the core sample, or this like cylinder of geological materials, is easily legible as a cultural symbol for how we understand geological time, how the geosciences quantifies geological time, and well, this is sort of a fanciful and speculative approach to representing sedimentary processes. It's one that is able to kind of situate the human within the geological in a way that's easily legible. Here's some details of what these pieces end up looking like. They end up being digital works, either as digital stills and prints or video. And and so by embedding, the human into the technological waste in a speculative core sample, it really kind of situates our present, and how the sedimentary record is being altered in ways that it has historically not been. And also we can speculate on what a human technoculture looks like on a geological timescale projected into the future, and how literally we are embedded with the Earth processes. So I've taken this approach to uh, you know sort of assemblage and scanning artifacts and objects that have interrelated narratives, and expanded that to produce kind of more screen-based works, short films and so on. So these are still frames from a work called Thin Natures, in which I'm also incorporating textual sort of narratives that link together these disparate objects and geological artifacts. So, for instance, some text is thinking about marble and its history as expired marine life that's metamorphosized into this material that's now prized for sculpting heroes and gods, or kitchen countertops, for example, or lithium salt mining in the Atacama Desert, which is crucial for car batteries, but also has impacts on the migration patterns of flamingos, which also live in the desert and eat the brine shrimp, which grows in these salty lakes, etc. And so lately, I think that through my work, I'm trying to get at these webs of interconnections and entanglements, between the human, the technological, and the natural, while also acknowledging this sort of false binary that there is between humans and nature, that they are not separate, but both part of the same thing. We have just created an artificial cultural separation, um, that kind of obstructs us from seeing nature as part of a holistic system that we're embedded within. Thank you guys very much for the time and the attention, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.